Hey everyone, happy new year and welcome to another episode of Advocacy Hour. Rebecca, happy new year. How did you spend your New Year's Eve or your New Year's Day, whatever you want to talk about? I'm curious.
Yeah, happy New Year to you too. What did we do? I spent my New Year's Day not doing a lot, but we had just moved like the day before. So I was
Oh my
recovering
goodness.
from a move within the same building, which is almost, I don't know, it's a different kind of move because it's like a bunch of
Yes,
little trips all day long.
totally.
So
Absolutely. We
yeah,
chilled as well. It was raining here in LA, which is very rare. So we had two kids that were having cabin fever and it wasn't exactly fun. Not going to say. And I was talking earlier about how I love a house that looks like nobody lives in it, and that just wasn't possible.
not on a day like
that's my
that. No.
that's my thing. That's my thing. My house needs to look like nobody lives in it for me to be happy. But you know, thank you so much for tuning in. I know it's a funny thing to say, but it's true. It's kind of what
Yeah,
my thing is. So I'm never going to be happy is basically what I'm saying.
as long as you know that, I think that's
As
the
long as
key.
I know that. But I wanted to start this year off talking about, just the future of faith and justice movements and deconstruction. TNE in general was started for the deconstruction community. And I know you know this about me, Rebecca, but maybe people don't know my story. I never deconstructed. I never went through that process. I didn't come from religious harm and I didn't come from having to break my faith down and rebuild it back again. But so many people in this community, so many people that follow this organization, that's what their story is. And there are a lot of organizations out there that are helping people navigate that space and figure it out, especially because we're in a time when people are losing trust in church. They're, obviously losing trust in our political climate. I mean, it's so hard to trust politicians these days. And they're also not sure like what nonprofits to support or be a part of. But what I have realized in these conversations, and I'm curious from your perspective as someone who's deconstructed, that even though people are leaving the church and trying to figure out where they are in their faith, they're still deeply driven by what their values are. And I think that that is something that is so beautiful. And so I'd love to know from you if you've seen a little bit of that people are more values driven these days.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point because we grow up, well, I grew up in my own story in a church that had a statement of faith, right? And these are like a list of beliefs that you kind of have to believe in order to
Mm,
belong in that place. And I think what I began to understand, and I think what so many people, what we're seeing is that the beliefs that they've held for so long don't line up with the values that they truly do hold. And so it becomes this
mm,
sort of this cognitive dissonance. How do I live out these values? But these beliefs are really leading me to not be able to live out those values. I have to do something different. I have to
yeah,
find somewhere that is more value aligned. And I really do think that is maybe the like crux of the whole thing is if I'm
sure.
saying what my values are, then I'm going to look for actions that align with that.
Yeah, and
And
I
there are
think
a lot of people who don't know what their values are. And so they hang
that's
on to beliefs
very true.
instead.
Very true. And I love that distinction because I think it's so important. I think it's also what's driving people to ask, okay, so where do I belong now? Where's my place? And also, because this is what this whole show is about, is like, how do I advocate when I'm going through this process of, am I values driven? Is my faith, aligning with what I believe, whatever the case may be? It's a lot to process. And we're gonna break it down a little bit more today, but I I know that the church does not encourage critical thinking. I know the church does not encourage asking questions. And I think that that's what people wrestle with. And I think that that's really what the starting point I've seen, at least for deconstruction, is that you start to ask one question and then it turns into two questions and then it turns into five questions. And then you're like, okay, now I'm questioning everything, right?
Right.
And I'd love to know a little bit more also for you what your background was kind of going through that process. Because I found it very interesting just learning these stories and talking to people about where they are in their faith and how they've gone through this deconstruction journey.
Yeah, I think it's really different for everybody. The starting point is really different. And like you said, it starts with one question usually,
Yeah.
because I can't
Yeah.
imagine anyone in their right mind like opening that door with 30,000 questions, right? You're
Sure.
not going to
Sure.
do that. You're not going to do something that's going to just totally flip your life around on purpose necessarily. But one question that can lead to all these other questions, and that was my experience. And I have kind of identified too that in my journey it really was more theological first, and then it was relational, and then it was political. So that is how
Mm,
it went for me. And I know that's not the case for sometimes it starts political first and then these other things.
yeah.
Um, so this is such a silly example, but it's the one I always think of. The story of David and Goliath. When we were children, we were taught that David killed Goliath with a rock, but the reality is that he didn't. He knocked him out and then he cut his head
Hmm,
off. And so I
hmm.
remember reading that when I was studying the Old Testament, and I was like, if they didn't tell me this story correctly, what else didn't they tell me?
Yeah,
And so I started
yeah.
reading, and that is really where it started for me. And then as time went on and I started to realize things like God looks at me as though I am this amazing creation because that is what I am. But the message that I was hearing in church was how horrible I was.
Yeah.
And that message that I wasn't enough. And then I kept thinking, well, if Jesus died and I'm saved, then why do I have to keep hearing the same message all the time? Shouldn't I behave
Mm,
as though I am redeemed? And so why do we continue to perpetuate this same message? It was those kinds of thoughts that led me to read other books by other authors and really dive into looking at the scriptures and seeing, like, do these beliefs match up with the values that I have? So it was that one question just
yeah.
opened these other doors that I did not know were there when I started.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I also have noticed is that because people don't feel safe asking these questions in their church environments, they are looking for groups, specifically like TNE, for example. But there are other nonprofit organizations or just collectives or just community groups that are allowing that space for people to ask questions because it's also giving this. Um, when you start to ask those questions, and let's say you do go to your pastor, and I've heard this story from so many people, they make you feel shame for trying to understand. They make you feel like you're not trusting God, or you're not trusting the process, or you're not diving into the word a little bit more. And they kind of frame the deconstruction process really as like a moral failure, which I think is so just damaging, right? And so I'm glad to see that there are more groups popping up that are kind of guiding people through this process and encouraging them to do what the church has really failed at doing. And again, there are churches that are doing a really good job at allowing critical thinking and that are popping up with more like social justice and things like that. But by and large, the majority of churches don't want you to question. And it's a shame
Right.
because it's a shame because I think certainty is actually a moral failure. You know what I mean?
Agreed. Yes. Yeah, I don't
It's
think that, if God is really as magnificent and huge and all these things that we say that God is he really bound to this box of certainty that we've created? I
yeah,
mean, that's a really
yeah,
hard thing for me to think it
yeah,
could be true, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah,
And
and I think
the
also
other
I'm
thing
sorry, go
you
ahead,
kind
go
of brought up too is like, once we start opening these doors, or we can't go to our pastors, so we find other resources. Well, those other resources are also demonized. So
ahead.
there are things
Mhm,
like, in recent years I have discovered things like feminist theology, womanist theology, queer theology, liberation theology. These are
yeah.
things I didn't even know existed until
I mean,
2
therapy
years
is even
ago.
demonized.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Like, it
anything
just
that's
yeah,
not taught there, it's not the
yeah,
approved list of authors, it's not from the approved publishing house, it's not from the approved
yeah,
music, producers, is heretical. And
yeah.
that keeps people engaged in the certainty.
Yeah, yeah. I also think that when it comes to deconstruction, people don't understand that. And again, this is just from my vantage point, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think people are losing their faith. I think that they're just trying to shed like living in an unsafe box to express their faith, right?
Yeah.
So they want to be able to explore it in a different way that keeps them rooted in the teachings of Jesus, keeps them rooted in the love, keeps them rooted in the compassion, but say, hey, this story that I heard, this doesn't feel right. Or
Right.
what you've guided me to believe, this doesn't necessarily feel right. This feels right, but this doesn't. And so there's just breaking it apart. I don't think people have, I mean, there are some people that probably have lost their faith, but from what I've seen is that a lot of people that have gone through this process, they haven't lost their faith completely. They're just trying to rework it in a way that one is sustainable because
Yes.
there's a lot of pressure to live a certain way I've noticed in the specifically white evangelical spaces, right?
Yeah.
But they want to live their faith in a way that's sustainable and also honors Jesus, you know? And I think that that's something that the church unfortunately has strayed away from.
I think it is really true that there are people that probably have maybe not found a way to recapture their faith in some way. But I also know that so many people that I do know who have done this, been on this journey of deconstruction really have such different stories. Like there isn't anybody who has the same story as me. There and I can say from my own experience that there were a couple years where I was not interested in prayer or being around worship music or these things, and that doesn't mean that I didn't want to be. It just means that there are time periods where I needed to pull away from some things so that I could understand, what does this actually mean to me, and what is the authentic meaning of it or value of it in my life? Does it have value because I choose that it does, or because I've experienced that it's real, and not because somebody forced me into that experience or told me I
Yeah.
had to, or created
Yeah.
these like rules, made up rules about what it
Yeah.
means to have a relationship with God. And so
Yeah.
the relationship I have with God is based on my experience, and it is so much fuller than it has ever been. And I would
Yeah.
imagine that the majority of people who have done these renegotiations and reconstructions of these pieces of their faith feel the same way.
Yeah, yeah. Uncertainty and critical thinking only threaten institutions. They don't threaten you as an individual. They actually help you grow. They
Yep.
make you a stronger person. They make your worldview bigger. And so when you are able to do that and make that step, then you can't be controlled. That's that's what it
Yeah.
comes down to. You can't be controlled. And because of that control, because there are a lot of people waking up to it and leaving the church, what are they looking for? They're looking for community elsewhere, right? They're
Mhm.
looking
Yes.
for movements and faith-based justice orgs, and not to toot TNE's horn, but when Tim founded TNE, it is one of the first ones that was really doing this and was really doing like
Absolutely.
community-based work, and we're just growing even more now. And there are so many other orgs, like I said, that are popping up, and we're going to talk about some of those a little bit later in the show. But when we look at how movements are being put together and how communities are being built, I think being able to shift from institutional power to relational power is such a huge thing for people. Because at the end of the day, like even when I think about my church experience, like I didn't leave church from a negative standpoint, but whenever you get a group of people together that are trying to make something happen, there's some stuff that's just going to go down. So it doesn't even matter that I went
That's
to a
so true.
progressive church. Like it's just there's always going to be some kind of drama. Personalities show up wherever you are, right? But
Yep.
the one thing I do miss about the church that I used to be a worship leader at was the community. It
Mhm.
wasn't even because, again, like you said, your relationship with God is a very personal thing, and it's not confined by walls, right? God is with me everywhere that I go, no matter what I'm doing. But that sense of community is, I understand and I feel that loss deeply, because
Mm.
there really is something about showing up on a Sunday morning with people who you think share the same beliefs and values that you do, enjoying good music and hearing an inspirational message. That's like a 10 out of 10 experience for a Sunday, right? But then when you
Absolutely.
break it down and then you try to dive deeper and then you have some issues, unfortunately, it can take away the joy of that experience and how it's supposed to shape your life.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I just like really felt deep resonance with that,
Mhm.
because
Yeah,
I think that's probably the experiences like that so many people have felt. It is joyful. It is important. It is because we were so committed. We cared so much. It is something the values that we held were so deeply because of our
yeah,
faith.
yeah,
And to be in community and be confronted by actions, behaviors, words, whatever it is, from people that all of a sudden you realize, like, oh, they don't hold those same values. Oh my gosh, what do I do with this now? And for some of us, like I tried to stay and have conversations. I tried to stay and be different in a place where everybody else was, I was the different one. And it's really hard to do that. So at some
Yeah.
point you have to
Yeah.
decide, Brian McLaren wrote a book about this. Do I stay Christian? Do I
Mm,
stay here or do I
mm.
leave? And there are good points and good reasons to do both.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's also another very personal question that people need to contend with. So
Sure.
people
Sure.
leaving doesn't mean that they just like up and left. I think also a lot of times it was over a long period of time and a long
Yeah.
struggle and really trying and ultimately deciding what was best for their own mental health or their own, their family, whatever the case might be, is that separation
Sure.
and to
Sure.
go
And I think
somewhere else where you feel safe. And you mentioned that too, like
absolutely.
being in a place that feels safe.
Yeah, and you have to remove the shame from leaving a space that isn't, serving you in whatever your journey is. I think that that's a big part of it. People make you feel shame like, "Oh, you don't go to church anymore." It's like, but the whole point is to have a relationship with God and to follow the life and teachings of Jesus. Like church is a part of that. It can be a part of that, or it doesn't have to be. But I think people think that church is all or nothing. And when it comes to like your faith journey, and that's just not true. A lot of people are just trying to live the way that Jesus lived. And that doesn't necessarily mean going to church every Sunday. Like,
Exactly.
again, I know plenty of people that go to church on Sunday and they be doing some questionable things throughout the week.
Same.
And I'm like, what did you learn in the pews on Sunday?
Were
Because
you
I don't see you
listening?
living. I don't think you were listening, my friend. I don't think you were listening. Um, so I will say, now in this era of social media and all this stuff, like we have a lot of digital communities that are popping up as well, and I think that that's a great alternative for people that are looking for community. But
Yeah.
what do you think builds trust from people that have come from religious harm or have left the church or trying to find community, but they're like, dipping their toe in, but they're a little bit afraid to like, even an online digital community, I'm worried about. Like, what do you think helps build trust in those spaces when you're coming from a bad experience?
Yeah, I think that's such a tough question because I do think that it does have a lot to do with whatever the experience was of the person, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
for for someone like me, I mean, I was so shut down with a lot of my questions. So I would say for me, it was like being able to ask questions. That was one. Having my experience like seen, and we've talked about this a lot, like holding space for people. And I know that can seem like such like a cliche thing to say, but it is
yeah.
really important for people, I think, to come. It was for me. I remember the first time somebody ever just sat and listened to my story and they said, "I'm so sorry that happened to you." They didn't
Mm,
say, but God has a plan or everything happens for a reason or like
right,
someday,
right.
blah, 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 blah. What all these things that people say. They said, "I'm so sorry that happened to you. I am so sorry that people who proclaimed this faith were so harmful to you." And having that validated, like having my experience just be what it was without any platitudes, without them trying to solve my problem, without them telling me that maybe I misunderstood or maybe I heard it wrong or whatever, that was the very first like piece for me to realize like,
Yeah,
oh, I can actually like, there are people that will hear me, that will see me. And then I think it is being selective. I mean, just because we, hurt people hurt people.
yeah,
So a lot of us have been hurt. It's really likely that we're probably going to hurt others along the way because we're also trying to heal some of these pieces. And so I think
sure.
having the humility to know I'm probably going to hurt someone along the way,
Yeah,
and I need to be willing to look at that and apologize, do all these things that like I value. I value communication. I value honesty. I value integrity. So I need to act with those things. And
yeah,
then having grace for people to make mistakes because I'm going to make mistakes. And I've
sure.
made a lot of them, and so I want to be somebody that can offer the same things that I'm hoping they will offer to me. And I think when we walk like that and we say, you know what, I'm hurting. This hurt me and I'm honest, then that can really build some trust with other people.
I love that. I think that that's a really good foundation of how to build trust. Because also, you don't want to build trust too quickly, because then you'll open yourself up to being hurt. And if you've already been hurt and then you get hurt again, then it's just like you're going down this spiral. You're like, I'm never going to go back to church or be in community again. It's like the worst experience
Exactly.
ever. But on that note, I was looking up some statistics just about people in church and demographics. And up until I think it was 2025, about 40 million Americans have just stopped attending church. This is in the last 25 years, 40 million Americans, which is very unsurprising to me. Like,
Mm.
I get it. I fully
Yeah,
get it. And one of the fastest growing groups in America is they are defined as the religiously unaffiliated. They don't want
which
to
I
have
actually
anything.
love that.
Yeah. I'm religiously unaffiliated.
Yes, I'm a nun.
I love that. But when I also looked up what people think of when they hear the church or hear Christianity, and my God, is it so disappointing? Specifically, younger generations, millennials and younger, they associate the church with hypocrisy, with Christian nationalism, harm towards the LGBTQ community, racism, silence or cover ups around abuse. None of those things say Jesus. And that's so, so heartbreaking to me. That's what
Yeah.
majority of people think when they hear church or Christian.
And if I was a leader of a church, I would hope that I would look at that and say, what are we doing to make sure that that's not how we are
Sure.
presenting
Yeah.
ours and behaving? Because it's not
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
optics, fine, but it's about what's actually going on in the building and with the
Yeah.
people, right? And
Yeah.
so I would
Yeah.
hope that, but I just don't see that being taken seriously by so many
It's
church
not.
leaders, and I think
It's
we
not.
can thank social media in part for that. It's like the
Sure.
double edged sword of it, right?
Yeah.
So
And also like the just find another church statement is like, well, that's not helping. And it also ignores the systemic issues within the church, right? It's not trying
yep,
to find a solution. It's not hearing people. It's not understanding where they're coming from. It's not trying to address their pain and their needs. It's just, well, this isn't the church for you. And that
yep,
in itself just makes people feel ignored, makes them feel invisible, makes them feel like they're not worthy of being there, like you don't care, that the community doesn't matter. I mean, the list goes on. When you just tell people, well, if this isn't for you, this isn't for you. It's like, do you think that is that what would Jesus do? Is that what Jesus would do? I don't think so.
yeah, and to me, that just feels like just move on to some, that statement of like, well, God didn't do that. It was people who hurt you,
Yeah.
not God.
Yeah.
And it's like, I know that actually.
Yeah.
And instead of holding people accountable, they want you to just kind of like bypass it. Well, people do hurt people. Yes, they do. And then there should be accountability. And I think
Hmm.
that's also a huge part of this is, we watch these things happen and we see the perpetrator stand up on stage on a Sunday morning and have the entire congregation praying for them. And we're like, where is the
Sure.
accountability in that? Now, that's not to
Sure.
say that they don't deserve grace just as much as I do, but I'm not the giver of that grace. Like, we are supposed to hold each other accountable. And I think values, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, values do a lot for that. That's what, when we say, I believe in integrity and I'm not acting in integrity, I would hope that you, as my very good friend, would say, hey, Rebecca, I don't think you're acting in integrity, and here's why. But it's also the ability to have those conversations, which, this is like a whole nother topic, but the emotional immaturity that exists
Oh,
is
yes.
something that, we don't even know it exists until we leave. And then we realize, oh my goodness, I never really learned how to feel anything. I never learned how to
Mm,
believe myself.
yeah. That's a
And
huge
so just
thing.
going to another church is like, so I'm going to trade this guy's direction for that guy's direction. I still haven't learned to listen to myself.
And people don't realize that when you leave those communities, it costs you something. It's not easy to leave a community that you maybe have been at your whole entire life, or maybe you
Right.
found, because a lot of churches are really good at getting you in the door, but keeping you there is usually the problem. But I mean, you lose your community, you lose your family, and it's crazy to think that like when people join a religion or a faith, they're doing it to be led, to be guided because they want to add something to their life. And then to just tell them, go your own way, do it on your own, figure it out. That's not, and like I said, it's going to be a little churchy, but it's not kingdom work. It's not doing
Right.
it for it. That's not at all. So it's like, how is kicking somebody out of the kingdom what Jesus would do? I don't think it is, right?
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
I think that there's so much that people don't realize. It's not just them rebelling. It's not just them, like I said, losing their faith. It's really actually wanting to be stronger in their faith, which is why they're asking the questions. And so then when they leave, they're like, well, what do I do now? And you lose relationships, you lose family, you lose some part of your
Yep.
identity, honestly. I mean, I know people feel like they lose a part of their identity when they've left their churches and left their communities. And it's really a hard thing to just deal with, especially on your own. So if you don't have community on Sunday morning, what do you do next? What do you do next? What was your next step?
Yeah. So for me, when I left, I was a single mom, and that played a pretty significant role in my leaving, actually, because I really wanted to do something where we were serving the single parents in the church that I was a part of and in the community. So I was seeing that I'm part of actually a pretty large group of people that are
Hmm.
parenting on their own, and they bring their kids to church, but they don't really belong necessarily women's ministry. Those women are all married and have kids, and men. I was focused more on the single moms, so not to leave out the single dads are amazing. But for me, I was thinking about that, and I went to the adult pastor and said, hey, I really want to do something for the single parents. And he said to me, look me, we're dead in the face, and said, but what if they start to take advantage of us? And I
Mm.
thought, that that's not kingdom work. That's not what the
Ah,
church should be like.
wow.
That's not That was crazy. It was mind-boggling to me. And so for me, it was building that community. It was finding other single moms around me that I knew. And even if they were still in the church, I didn't really care if they still went. It was not about creating any kind of like third party offense for them, right? They needed to have their own experience, but I wanted to show them that there was somewhere where they were valued and cared for.
Mm,
And so I had a really good friend for about 3 years. She and I had dinner every Tuesday night with our kids, and that became like this tiny little church community, I think, for both her and for me and our boys.
yeah,
And so it was just really figuring out like, who do I need and who needs me, so
yeah.
that we can feel more like whole in this life
Mm,
together. And so I
yeah,
think that was really the best thing that I could have ever done was find her. And we just
yeah,
figured out
yeah.
life together. And we're not really, I mean, we're still friends, but it was like really a time period until I found, some other people. And now I'm remarried and all of that. But I think TNE was also really significant from a theological standpoint and the
Mhm,
political side of things, because like relationally, it's hard to do that digitally. But I would say from the theological and political standpoint, I didn't know that there were so many other people.
mm,
I
yeah,
thought that I was doing a lot of this alone, which is so silly now to think about. Of course, there were other people,
sure.
but I just didn't know. And
Yeah,
so being connected, even if it's just casually, like through the Connect app, or, we like Tim and I were at Theology Beer Camp, or Ember Gathering is coming up, or just virtually, attending some of the courses that we have, interacting on Instagram, those things are all important. They
yeah,
don't fill
absolutely.
the place of in person for sure, but there are other things that do. We
Yeah.
joined the Elks just so we could be part of a community that eats together and does service work together. It's
I
not a
love that.
religious community, but it's still service work.
But that's a type of
Um,
church, and I think that people
yeah.
need to be fine with that. Like, that's any you can find church anywhere, honestly. I mean, we had a community out here before the pandemic. I used to sing at a club called the Sayers Club, and we always would joke, be like, "That's our Thursday night club." It was so late. Oh my god, I would never sing at 11 o'clock at night again. I was like, that was like pre-kids. Never doing that again. But that felt like church because it was a community of musicians. We were coming together, performing, singing songs that we love, performing for huge crowds, and it was great. But like, you can find church anywhere. It's like minded individuals that feel the same way and move through the world the same way that you do and show up in the same way that you do. That's church,
Yep.
And I think it's okay if you have to find it outside of, a steeple with a cross. I think that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there are, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of organizations and community groups that are doing some great work to help people um, as they're going through their deconstruction journey. That want to find faith again, don't know where to start. So I'm just going to list a few of these, but remember, you can always find all of the resources that we talk about on Advocacy Hour on TNE Connect and in the hub that says TNE Action. We will have a brand new hub for religious trauma and deconstruction for you, so you can find these organizations, some helpful resources, links, articles, all of that. But here's just a few of the organizations. And Rebecca, if you have any more that we can list, we'll make sure to put them in TNE Action as well. Post Evangelical Collective is a great one. Reclamation Collective as well. They're survivor centered, recovering from religion. This is an international nonprofit and they have peer led support groups. There's also Religious Trauma Institute. They have a lot of education and advocacy. And then Broken to Beloved, which is a healing centered organization that offers a lot of cohorts and workshops. So we will put all of those in to TNE Action for you to be able to access. I just want to say, as someone who didn't go through this as their journey, what I have realized is that healing takes time. And I think that a lot of people in the deconstruction community need to remember to give themselves grace. That's the one thing that I've noticed. There needs to be more grace for yourself, for others, and realizing that God's gonna be there whenever if you ever decide to go back. Like God's not going anywhere,
Yep.
right?
He's not going
And
anywhere.
he's not going anywhere. And despite what the church will make you believe that if you leave God, like he's not gonna he's always gonna be there. He,
Yep.
she, they, however
And I
you
can
see
attest
God.
to that
Yeah.
because I said, I'm not talking to you for like 2 years. And guess what? God was still
Ah,
there. So,
yeah.
yes.
And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So wherever you are in your faith journey, however you choose to show for others or advocate, just know that you're doing it the right way and you're doing it in the way that you need to do for you. Because, like, as you said, Rebecca, everybody's story is different. Everybody's story, specifically in this journey, it's so, so different. So, any final words, Rebecca, since you have gone on this journey, any ways that you want to, anything you want to share with anyone?
Yeah, I think just a reminder that curiosity is so important in this. And I think that
Yeah.
we're really trained not to be curious. And so that might be the hardest part of it is like
Yes.
allowing ourselves to be curious. But that is the most important piece
Hmm.
is to learn that
Hmm.
curiosity. And so that's all I would say. If learning to be curious is what changed everything for me
Yes.
and being open to what shows up in our lives, like I couldn't imagine 5 years ago being here now and I wouldn't
Mm,
trade it for anything. And I would say that most people in deconstruction at some point in their journey look back and say, wow, I'm so glad I got curious about that one thing.
yeah. That's when you can say everything happens for a reason.
Yes,
That's
exactly,
when it's an
exactly.
applicable statement.
Yeah, at some
Uh,
point those phrases are less cringy, but it takes
yes, right.
time
But you're
and
like,
that's
"Okay,
okay.
now I'm fine hearing that, but can you not say that when I'm, like, in the depths of my sadness and, like, trying to
Yes,
figure out my life?" Yes.
exactly.
All right, everyone, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And we're going to continue to show you ways that you can put your faith in action. But if you're on a deconstruction journey, know that you can still show up for others, but showing up for yourself is what's most important if you're on that journey right now. So thank you for listening to Advocacy Hour, and we will see you next time.